D-Day has arrived. We start by setting up the composition with the desired size, frame rate, and duration. The rest of the compositions will have the same settings. We create the composition where the objects that will become our bubbles will be. We choose white as the color, and what is darker will help with distortion, so the darker part will be perceived as distortion. I used a shape with a gradient, and to highlight the edge of the circle, I used layer styles, inner shadow, bevel, and to remove the black from the edge, I added a white stroke. To change the circle shape to a more fluid one, I used turbulent displace with the time expression on evolution. Then I duplicated several circles and spread them across the composition. I used an adjustment layer, where I applied the blur and choker effects to make the intersection between circles appear more like liquid. I used the twirl effect optionally to distort the circles in the center, making them more interesting. The next composition is where the background will be, which can be easily changed. The next composition is the texture that will be used for the bubbles, which will serve as reflection. On this composition, I applied the CC glass and CC Blobalize effects to create bumps and reflections. These effects are often used for fake 3D glass or metal. I cut these compositions through matte to get the exact edges as in the composition with my circles. And of course, I set the screen mode on the composition used for reflection. On an adjustment layer, I applied the chromatic displacement effect from Red Giant. This is used to add distortion in the illusion that the background is red distorted on the bubbles. Besides, it has an interesting chromatic effect that makes the bubbles more similar to soap bubbles. I used another adjustment to blur the edge of the reflection. Here, on camera blur, I used that black and white map which I used for coloring the black and white bubbles. I duplicated the composition with the bubbles used for reflection. I removed all the black and left only some thin white lines to create a glow effect using Deep Glow. To create shaded edges, I put the composition with bubbles in a separate composition and used masking to create a slightly noticeable stroke. In the main composition, I set them to color burn mode. I duplicated the reflection composition again and used it to accentuate the reflections on the bubbles, adding a chromatic aberration effect from Plugin Everything. After that, I duplicated the composition with bubbles to create some shadows. I colored and used the radial blur effect to give it a scattered shadow. I set all this in classic color dodge mode to give it a subtle effect and to get the correct color depending on the background. With this, the composition is ready. All that remains is to choose the background I want, and, of course, I can add different bubbles, whether they are flying, floating, or just objects.